We're well into November, and do you want to know how many quilts I've made this year? Just one. Welcome to the Sewing Report. I'm Jennifer Moore, helping you discover your love of sewing crafts and DIY projects. We're taking it outside in this edition because I want to show you my one and only quilt for 2018. I know I had high hopes. I was aiming to finish more than one quilt this year, but this is the reality. I started this baby triangle quilt several years ago. It was originally intended to be a king-sized bed quilt, but over time I'd cut out all these triangles. They are 8.5-inch, 60-degree triangles using my Creative Grids ruler. Cut out hundreds of these, and I kind of lost steam on this project. As you might know that feeling, it's one of those UFOs that kind of sits around forever. And a friend of mine from college had a baby about like 4 to 6 months ago. So I thought, you know, why not make a baby quilt? These colors match the baby's nursery. So I thought, you know, why not? So we are outside so I can fully show you the quilt. We're also going to go through the entire process of making this quilt over the entire year. I've had these 60-degree triangles from Carolyn Friedlander's Botanics collection forever, so let's finally start sewing these together. It's pretty simple. I'm just sewing triangle to triangle, and then we're going to sew them in rows. There's really no pattern. I do have a tip for sewing the triangles together though. You don't sew them end to end. You want the points to overlap a little bit by about 1/4 inch. And then when you press them open, everything will be even. And I always press to the dark, and I tried to alternate my triangles, you know, light, dark, light, dark. So now we're sewing the rows together, and another tip I have for that is to baste it using Elmer's washable school glue. I start off at the points, baste it down, hit it with a dry iron, and then I also fill in the section in between the points, and that gives you really nice crisp points to your blocks. All right, now the top's done. Time for basting. I'm using these curved safety pins. They work great. I'll link them below. I use them for all my quilts. I have used spray baste in the past, but I found that the spray baste gets everywhere, so I actually prefer the safety pins. And then as I'm quilting, I remove them. As far as the actual quilting, I'm just doing walking foot straight line echo quilting at an angle, and I'm using the guide arm that comes with the walking foot, and I'm kind of doing randomly spaced out lines. This part did take me a while, but not as long as you would expect if you just keep going at it, and I kind of alternated which direction I was going in just so that there wasn't a lot of shiftage and that my quilting would be more even. So here's a look at the quilting process. It obviously took a lot longer than you see in the video, but you get the idea. And using a walking foot, highly recommended. It really helps keep your layers from shifting, and everything just looks a lot more even, and you don't get a lot of puckering, which is great. And my backing is actually a sheet from Target that I got for about $3. I love using Target sheets as quilt backing. They have a really nice line of organic cotton. Great for backing, I just pre-wash it. All right, here's a close-up. You can see the guide arm. And this was really my first time using it. I haven't really used it a whole lot in the past, but worked out really nicely for this project. And I'm using different colors of thread. I thought that would just kind of add to the visual interest. I'm using Aurifil, mostly 40 weight thread. Now we are trimming the quilt. I'm using my Creative Grids rollers. I cannot say enough good things about Creative Grids and my Ginger rotary cutter. And I use the edge of the ruler to make sure all my corners are squared. Let's talk binding. I'm just cutting 2.5-inch strips, and I learned this technique in Deb Karasic's quilt binding class. I'll link to her blog below because it's a really helpful resource, and this technique is all hers. I cannot take credit for this. So I'm basically just using glue basting to put all my binding pieces together, using some chain piecing here. All right, now we're just trimming all my threads here. And I'm using scissors to cut off the excess. And now you have to just break apart the sections that you glue basted, and you're going to be pressing these seams open and folding all your strips in half lengthwise, like I'm doing right here. Hit it with an iron, and this is how you make binding, people. Really easy, not very painful, and I'm going to show you how I machine bind the quilt as well. And you can use some simple math to figure out how many strips you need. Obviously, it's about 40 inches for each strip you cut from fabric. Measure around your quilt to see what the perimeter is, and then divide that by 40, and that's how many strips you'll need. Give yourself a little extra though. That's what I would recommend. I'm just getting my binding ready. All right, now it's time to attach it to the front of the quilt. So you're going to sew it to the front, and this is just your typical double fold binding here. And a little tip when we get to the corner here, you'll see what I mean. All right, so now you're going to leave your needle down, pivot diagonally, and you're going to stitch off the end of the quilt here. So stitch off the end. Each corner will look like this. Fold it over like I'm doing, and then you're going to just start a new row just sewing over that. Now there's going to be a gap between where you started and where you finished, and this technique, again, I got straight from Deb Karasik. Using this method by opening up my binding, pinning it down, you'll be able to know where you need to sew it together and have the length be perfect for the rest of the quilt. All right, so now we're cutting it again, opening up the part where you glue basted, folding it in half, and then you're going to stitch that to the front of the quilt. When that's all done, you want to press your binding flat, press the edges flat, and then you're going to press against the seam, and now you're going to fold the binding all the way over to the back and use some Wonder Clips, which I love, to keep the binding in place. Now, tip, because I'm going to be machine binding and stitching in the ditch, I want to make sure that my binding on the back side is even, so I'm using the Wonder Clips as a guide and making sure that the binding overlaps to the back uniformly all the way around. So you can see whenever I'm clipping it, it's going just to the end of the clip there. So now that I've got that all done, you're just gonna take it to your sewing machine, be very careful, go slow, stitch in the ditch from the front to the back, and then hopefully it'll catch the fabric on the back side. Sometimes you may miss a few spots and you'll have to go over them, or you can hand stitch them closed. With this one, it ended up working out perfectly, and it caught the binding on the back the entire way around. So that's what it'll look like when you machine bind. I even went a little extra and embroidered a quilt label for the recipient. This is a really fun and simple quilt to make, and best of all, doesn't require a pattern, just 60-degree triangles all cut out. You can use scrap fabric, and if you're not a procrastinator like me, it should take you less than a year to complete. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe to the Sewing Report for everything sewing, crafts, and DIY projects. I'm Jennifer Moore, and I will see you again in the next video.